Welcome to the Roy Morgan Weekly Update. And the second week of the official federal election campaign has been won by Labor. The Roy Morgan polls show the ALP on 54.5% on a two-party preferred basis. That's up 1% from a week ago, well ahead of the LNP coalition on 45.5%. If a federal election had been held last weekend, the Albanese ALP government would have been returned with an increased majority. There are several factors driving this vote. Perhaps the biggest is President Donald Trump's worldwide tariff announcement, which he called Liberation Day. The tariff announcement caused extreme market upheaval throughout the last week. The ASX 200 plunged early in the week before recovering most of its losses by the end of the week. And the Australian dollar was on a similar rollercoaster ride. In times of uncertainty, we usually see voters swing towards the incumbent government, and this reaction has been seen in recent weeks with increasing support for the Albanese government, at least on a two-party preferred level. Peter Dutton and the coalition created their own uncertainty with their policy to cut the cost of the public service and improve productivity by sacking over 40,000 public servants and forcing federal public servants to work from the office. Opposition leader Peter Dutton candidly said the coalition made a mistake with this policy and ditched it early last week. The impact of the latest policies released by the government and opposition at their official campaign launches on Sunday, especially policies to help first home buyers into the property market, will be reflected in next week's Roy Morgan poll. But importantly, it's vital to remember that early voting starts in under a week, straight after Easter. Primary support for the major parties was little changed, with the coalition up 0.5% to 33.5% and the ALP down 0.5% to 32%. The Greens, often criticised for being focused on esoteric environmental, global, big picture issues while people struggle with the cost of living, saw their biggest vote for 6 months after focusing on free education and free dental care. Support for the Greens increased 1% to 14.5%. Support for One Nation was unchanged at 6%. Other parties dropped 2% to 4%. Clive Palmer's Trumpet of Patriots party received 1% support. That's down 0.5% from a week ago, while support for independence increased 1% to 10%. In a further spot of good news for the Albanese government, this week's government confidence, whether people think the country's going in the right direction or the wrong direction, increased 5 points to 86. Still a low number, below the neutral level of 100, but the highest figure for over 18 months since September 2023. A look at Roy Morgan government confidence by voting intentions reveals some quite stark differences. ALP voters are very much in positive territory, with a government confidence of 136.5 compared to only 54.5 for LNP coalition voters. And interestingly, it's voters of other parties, which includes Pauline Hanson's One Nation and Clive Palmer's Trumpet of Patriots, with the lowest government confidence at only 38.5. Only 10% of these people say the country's going in the right direction, compared to 71.5% who say the wrong direction. ANZ Roy Morgan consumer confidence has clearly reacted negatively to the events of last week and was down 2.6 points to 84.2 after a week of extreme market volatility. The two indicators to weaken most related to the Australian economy's performance over the next year and people's expectations for personal finances in a year's time. Inflation expectations were unchanged at 4.6% this week, remaining below the long-term average. So Australians now expect inflation of 4.6% over each of the next 2 years. Now to employment and unemployment, the measure that really matters. Real unemployment in March was down 1.3% on a month ago to 10.2%. So an estimated 1.6 million Australians are unemployed. There were two drivers of this decrease in unemployment: an increase in people employed. Full-time employment was up 29,000 and part-time employment was up 34,000. But the largest factor was the reduction in the workforce, with 167,000 Australians previously looking for work now out of the workforce. Essentially, they stopped looking for work. So in essence, although there were more jobs, there weren't enough for all the people who were looking a month ago. And finally today, to a special Roy Morgan SMS poll on iconic Australian sporting anthems. And the results are conclusive. Up There Kazali by Mike Brady, a song about an iconic Australian footballer named Roy, is Australia's most iconic sporting anthem, by far. When asked to name an iconic Australian sporting anthem, nearly 3 in 10 Australians, 28%, named Up There Kazali. And most importantly, this was an unprompted answer. They just told us that was the answer. Up There Kazali was almost 3 times as popular as Men at Work's Down Under, who received 11%, and more than 3 times as popular as Banjo Patterson's Waltzing Matilda, often played at Australian rugby union matches, at 9%. When asked directly about Up There Kazali, the results are even more conclusive. 2/3 of Australians, or 66%, agree that Up There Kazali is an iconic Australian sporting anthem. And this sentiment is widespread, extending to 69% of women and 63% of men. For younger Australians under 35, only 1/3 consider Up There Kazali to be an iconic Australian sporting anthem. But for Australians aged 35 plus, around 80% agree the song is an iconic Australian sporting anthem. Thanks for your interest in Roy Morgan's latest results, and I'll be back next week to bring you the latest results on consumer confidence, inflation expectations, and voting intention as the campaign enters its final stretch to election day. Thanks for listening.